Thanks for tuning in to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital and products and manufacturing. Why do you need a project manager? This question is one that our team at Razorleaf gets when working with our clients. In this conversation, Jonathan and Jen are joined by Razorleaf colleagues Melissa Bussard and Jeff Meyer, both who have a deep understanding of the role and value of project management. Melissa and Jeff share their experiences to help dispel the notion that project managers are there just to keep schedules on track. It goes way beyond that. It is relationship-focused and helps keep teams aligned. It coordinates different stakeholders and effectively manage resources, including people and budget. Project managers serve as the liaison between the technical sides of the business and the business side of the business. Let's listen in and learn what you can expect from a good project manager.
Welcome back, everyone, to Stay Sharp, the podcast about all things digital related to products and manufacturing. I am Jen Ferello, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Jonathan Scott.
Hi, everybody.
And today's topic is one of the questions Razorleaf gets asked most often, and that is, why do I need a project manager on this service project? To help us out and dig in a bit on that, we have invited a couple of our project management experts, Melissa Bussard and Jeff Meyer, to help us dig into that a bit. Both Jeff and Melissa bring years of experience working on the services side of Razorleaf and on service projects in general. And they are our experts in, you guessed it, project management. So if anyone isn't seeing why you need a PM and what happens if you don't have one, it's these two. So welcome, guys. Glad you could join us today.
Nice to be here.
Yes. Thank you.
Now, my husband, I've mentioned this in a couple of the other podcasts, is in home remodeling. He's worked in construction in the past as well. So I know firsthand just how critical a good project manager is to the success of any project. But many of our listeners may be wondering some of the same questions, like I said, that we usually get asked. Like, what sort of tasks are a project manager responsible for? How is it different than program management? What's the value? Why do I actually need a project manager?
Yeah.
So, Jonathan, can you start us all off like we usually do? Like, what do we mean by project management?
Yeah, I'll offer just a very simple view of this, which is, how do you keep a team of people on track to accomplish an objective, right? I mean, that's what I think of when I think of project management and the broader topic of program management. And, maybe we'll get into those and talk about, what do we mean by those too? But I mean, that's what I think of. Right now, there's a lot to it, right? And that's why we brought on experts to talk about it. But from my perspective, it is keeping things on track. And what does on track mean? I mean, to your point, Jen, about clients ask us, well, do I need this? What do I need this for? What's this for in my project? That kind of thing. I excuse me, I think that's it exactly. How do we all stay on track? Not just Razorleaf delivering, but I don't know, 99% of the projects we do are with the client, right? Together, we're doing something. How does everyone stay on track together? And I think, to me, this activity, the people that fill this role, that's invaluable to keeping everyone on track. So at a base level, I think that's what we're talking about. You could put a lot of labels on it, right? And Jeff and Melissa, maybe you guys can help us with some of those. But I think that's what we're digging into today.
Yeah, I totally agree, Jonathan. It's basically an overview, taking a look at a project from a high level, being able to drive down and communicate the status to all the shareholders or stakeholders, and just having a proven methodology or a hybrid methodology to actually report on the project status.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, when I say keeping on track, I think, to me, one of the things that can be toughest in a project is staying aligned. Right? That, okay, at the beginning, we all think we know what we're doing. At least everybody who put the project together does, right? But, and Melissa, I saw that nod from you because I know you've dealt with this, right? Which is, right. And now we get a different team of people involved. And is everybody still on the same page, right? Is the technical team on the same page as the people who said, let's write the scope and let's get going, or the people on the client side who said, this is what we need, that kind of thing? I mean, what do you see there in terms of why we need PMs to help us with alignment?
Well, there's a lot of coordination, obviously, that has to happen. Of course, you have a lot of personalities and a lot of focus in different areas. So you have your developers who, anything is possible, right? So they just want to develop to whatever they're asked to do. You have the customer who has a grand plan outside of what maybe the scope of this project was supposed to be, right? And then you have your solution architect, which is, trying to figure out, okay, I'm going to plan this out. And you're trying to bring all these people together and you're trying to make sure that everybody stays in their lane and doesn't drift into the other lane, right?
And is lined up, right?
Exactly. Lined up and everybody's getting to the same destination at the same time using the same wallet. So I think that's a good way of putting things. But another thing I think that is important with a project manager is not only are you coordinating, but you're also helping to foster those relationships. So, by bringing people together in weekly team meetings or identifying issues and saying, hey, let's meet on that. It's gone back and forth in a couple of emails or, things seem to be getting lost in translation in some way. A project manager is going to be able to identify when those communications, additional communications are needed and help to foster those communications and meetings and whatnot and try to, smooth the road, keep people on the path and get to that destination.
Right. To that point, I know, being a technical person, I see plenty of technical folks who, well, I sent an email on it. Don't they know? Right. But to your point, Jeff, the point you made about oversight, Melissa, your point about communication, a lot of times that's exactly what's needed is somebody who's a step removed, looking at it from the outside saying, wait a minute, people are not on the same page here. I know you sent that or you didn't include the right people or whatever it might be, but hey, let's get together because we're all pointed in the same direction, trying to do the same thing. Let's work together on it. People don't understand you or whatever the message might be. But that makes perfect sense.
What I'm picturing as you guys are all talking about, like keeping people aligned and keeping things in, I'm picturing like chaperoning 5-year-olds at a zoo and just like kind of, okay, counting heads, making sure, no, we're going in this direction, but
I
you're
like
right.
the reptile house. I can get distracted. It's happened before.
Come on, Jonathan. We got to go. But I think you're right. And it's not just that, right? It's a lot of times you're pulling in people that this is not their primary job. They have other things to do. So you have to kind of continually shepherd them in and say, okay, no, make sure that you get this done this week because there are a number of dominoes that are depending on that being done.
I think we see that plenty in projects. We need a subject matter expert for 4 hours or for a meeting or for a little thing. But, making sure we know who that person is, that we've reached out to them and given them enough background that they know how to participate, all those things. What do you guys see there, right? In terms of back to that alignment point, I know it's important to get everybody on the same page, but sometimes they're scattered, right? In terms of who you're getting. That's another thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, the resource management part of it's very important, making sure you're bringing the right people in at the right time, making sure that you're fully utilizing the resources that you're bringing in, which ties into managing budget. But yeah, I would say resource management is one of the most important parts to make sure that the team gels well together. And technically, they can handle any of the issues that come up.
You mentioned another thing there, Jeff, that I've seen. It's the reverse. This is going to seem weird, but it's another thing that I've seen our PMs handle well. We've asked for a resource from the client side. They've worked very hard to get that person for the project. And then, the timing's not right. They're not getting used as much as they expected to be used. So those expectations on resource usage go both ways, right? I don't get enough of their time, or they got allocated to this, but I'm not ready for them, that kind of thing. All those timing issues. These are more of the things I think that you guys do that people don't realize that need to be done to make a project successful.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jonathan.
I just wanted to kind of chime in a little bit on this, and that is that, it's not just, our Razorleaf resources, that we're trying to coordinate, right? We may have vendors that are working for us. The customer could have vendors. I'm working on a project now that, I'm basically doing the majority of our project is just me project managing a certain group within a company who's using an outside vendor and we're assisting in testing, right? So the coordination there is, the business, the entity within the business and the vendor trying to all come to the same. So, when you talk about resource management, which is a really good point, it's not just resource management on our side. A lot of times it's resource management, on the customer, and it can be vendors. And the last point I want to make there too is that sometimes you tell the customer, we need an SME for this, or we need the point person for this, and they may give you that person or they may not, right? So sometimes, even when you get that person, you wind up having to somewhat manage their time for them as well, just to keep the project moving. So.
Yeah, and I think that tied with the resource management, it goes directly, and we'll use this example for escalation process. We're not getting the right resources from the customer. How do we have a formal escalation process to get it up through the client to make sure that it's being heard? Because there are some times where you need that, senior leadership to step in and give direction. So you need that formal process and communication and have those relationships already built. So when those type of decisions have to be made, you have that path to get it solved.
Yep. I'm going to use that as a segue, Jeff, to ask you guys about something that I think is important. I feel like I've heard this and learned this from our project management organization over the years. But you mentioned having a process set up, right? That reminds me of how much work gets done at the beginning of a project or needs to be done at the beginning of a project. Can you guys talk a little bit about that? I mean, as we think about keeping things on track, what do you need to do at the beginning so that you're set up for success as you go?
Well, one of the things I'd like to see is when you're creating either the statement of work or statement of service is those processes, the escalation process we'll use as an example, is set up within that document. So you're already negotiated. Everybody knows what it is. You define it before the project even starts. And I really think it's important to have those type of elements in the statement of work.
I see a story on your face, Melissa.
Well, I will say that, unfortunately, project management is more of a latter thought. I'll just put it that way. When people are working on the statement of work, they're working more on, what is the task we're trying to accomplish, right? And so, if a project manager is involved, somewhere within at least the middle to the end of the process, it does help us to identify other areas within the project that may need to get included to help it run a little bit smoother, right? To Jeff's point. So, sometimes that doesn't happen. We get the project, as is, and, we make that work as best we can. So.
I think the most successful projects I've been on are when professional services are represented early in the statement of work. And part of that process, whether it's the project management or not, or manager or not, isn't as relevant as just making sure that professional services is part of it. So we're addressing these types of issues.
Well, and I know that's one thing we do really well at Razorleaf, but to Melissa's point, as far as involving services in the creation of the statement of work, but to Melissa's point, guilty as charged. I have project management. Yes, we should put some of that in there too, but not really. And so this is actually a really good podcast for me to be listening to as well as participating in to realize, yes, how important this is. And I can see where if you're setting things up correctly in the beginning, you've got planned it out. And this is what happens when something goes wrong, or we have identified some additional work or some different work that needs to be done, then that's, change orders. Okay. If you've got all of that defined up front, so much easier, right?
Mm-hmm. And I would say with the change orders, not always it's just as important if it's a change order because of additional funding. But I could also say that it's as important if you're adding more requirements and what I'll call a zero cost change order, where you're adding scope to the project that might not be impacting the budget, but you still have it documented with that $0 change request. It just keeps everybody in line with deliverables.
Yeah, That makes sense, right? Back to that alignment, keeping everything on track. And so that takes us into another topic that I think can be, I'll say, maybe misunderstood or under-understood by a lot of folks. It's easy to say the words, well, PMs manage time and budget. What does that mean? I mean, give the audience sort of that picture of those two simple words. What does it mean in terms of what you're actually doing over the course of a project?
I'll take this one. So time and budget, obviously, we have to look at hours and effort, right? How many hours do we have for our resources within the project, or, how much, effort was, as far as how many resources over a period of time, right? That all goes in against that time and money part of it as far as the budget goes. So, I will say this as far as that goes, yes, that's an important part of project management, but that is not the only thing that we do. And I think a lot of people look at project management as, they check a box on a schedule and they bill us, right? Or they make sure that they can invoice and we have enough money. But there's a lot of things you have to look at with the project for time and budgeting. That, hey, are we getting the work done within that time and budget, right? Do we have the right resources? Do we have enough resources? That kind of thing. So it's not just checking off a box. Oh, we're on schedule. Oh, yeah, we're on budget. But are we achieving what we need to with the time and money that we have?
Yeah, Melissa, you made a lot of great points. And I think it's tying that budget into the project plan, making sure on-time deliverables are there within the budget that we're allocating. You always start off with the SOW and you have, your budget set up and you're assuming you're going to meet this timeline, but how is it actually, what's your burn rate? Are you actually delivering what you thought you were going to deliver with the hours that you predicted?
And I think you're both touching on an important piece, which is, again, in my mind, one of the reasons why it's really critical to have someone watching that is you need to watch it as you go, right? It's not we got to the end and guess what? We happen to be in budget and deliver what we needed to, or we happen to be over, that's not good. The point is for real alignment with the client or the wider team period, you need to know that 10% into the project and 20% in and 50% in. And, as you go, and I think that's the point you were making, Melissa, right? About how do you track that against the progress you're making? It's not, those things aren't just independent.
Yeah. And do you have the right resources, right? All along, right? You know what? If we had added one more resource, we could have finished this on time, or we could have, that kind of thing. Or, do we have the right resources on either end to achieve the time and budget constraints that we have? So.
And Jonathan, to your point, the periodic measuring, I think, is one of the most important pieces, right? Because if you've identified early on, hey, look, you know what, we're going to need some additional resources, or, basically, or, we're going to need some additional time. There's some, not necessarily time, but calendar time, because of, a resource can't come in at the right point. So we're going to be on budget, but we're going to be 2 weeks late. If you tell people that ahead of time, way ahead of time, then you have time to adjust. They have time to adjust. And it's not oh shit, sorry, bad news.
Right.
2 weeks late and 50% over budget. No, it would never be that bad, but still, the earlier you alert people, the better.
And I'm going to use one of the things that you brought up, Jen, as a jumping off point to ask about something I hear about all the time. So I imagine, Jeff and Melissa, you're going to have a view on this and can help clarify it for the audience. Time. Okay, is that effort or duration? Or yes, right? Yes. And what does that mean? Why do people always get that confused?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, it's both time and, effort. And I think that's true on how efficient your team is working. You could have the same, and I've done this, where you have almost parallel projects going on. You have two separate teams, but one's highly efficient. So, those are all the things you have to weigh into how you're reporting the progress of the report and the cost trackers. One other point I wanted to bring up, Jonathan, that you were talking about is reporting on the status of the project. And to me, it's very important, and Jen, you brought this up as well. It's very important to consistently report on the project. I send out cost trackers, one source of truth, a dashboard of the project every Friday. And so everybody sees exactly what's going on, not only the budget, but resource availability. And it's one place. I don't inundate the client with artifacts. It's one artifact that shows them everything that they need to see. And what I found in the past is where we're getting all of this information sent at different times isn't as effective as just having one single dashboard that covers everything you need. Could be risk registers, budget, resource availability, but all what's important to that project is one source of truth.
Right. So you're not burying the needle in the haystack of information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, not that email, this one. Did you not see that one?
Yeah.
Well, I had a little example to give you guys. So I'm on a project right now. This particular customer had a bad experience with project management a few years ago and kind of swore off project management. And now, they have me, which actually has thankfully gone very well. Yeah, that's gone fairly well. But this is a type of project too that, we have a set budget and a number of resources per that budget per year for 3 years. So we have, we have to stay on track. So, I have to keep a balance sheet, and the customer is keeping one as well for their, for their own, information. But this is where we have to constantly look at it when you talk about time and budget. Okay, I have 5 resources. This is how much they're supposed to have per month. And then they're supposed to average that out, each week, or actually I average it out by the month, right? And so I report on that each month internally to Razorleaf. I also, also make sure that my books match the customer's books. But this is one of those times when you have to be really diligent on, okay, what is usage with each other, right? With the resources and time that we have, because at the end of the year, that budget doesn't roll over. It ends. So it's a use or lose, and you can't go over. So
I'm curious, because it's what I was hearing you saying there is that, obviously they're keeping books, we're keeping books, et cetera. We have project managers. Does the customer have a project manager at their site?
They do. In this particular case,
or at least highly recommended.
Yeah, this one they do. But I send them all the time reporting. It's managing our resources on this point, because that's where the our budgeting is coming from. He might be keeping track of their internal budgets and resources and charge numbers and whatnot. So I'm not privy to that one.
Well, no, but that's why I asked, because it seems like all of the things that we're talking about as far as managing a services delivery on our side is every bit as important to have a one person doing the same on the client side, so that they're managing their resources, they're bringing them in when they're doing all the same things.
Yeah, and that relationship that you're talking about between the project managers are critical from the client side as well as from the Razorleaf side. That really drives a healthy project because there has to be transparency, and probably there's more transparency between the project managers than anywhere else. And if you have that type of relationship, you can knock down barriers very quickly. I think that you really hit it, Jen, that there has to be that really good relationship between the two project managers.
Let me ask a contrarian question there, though, because I've seen this. I think I've seen it not go well. I think I've seen it go okay. Can you do without a customer project manager? In other words, if we get involved and we are the only project manager, what do you need? I see you nodding, Melissa. What do you need to be successful if that's the case? Can that work, and what does it take?
Most of the projects I'm on, I do not have a project manager that is, or at least an active project manager on the other side. And a couple I have, and, they've been fantastic. But, if the customer is open to having us do project management, they generally will follow say I'm the project manager, they're going to follow my lead. They're going to, I can assign tasks, I can coordinate with them and whatnot. But there's usually somebody at the customer site that's overseeing the project, but not
Sure.
necessarily at a project management level.
Maybe a
So
sponsor or something like that.
Yeah, or just making sure they're responsible for the project, but they're not doing project management. So they will lean on Razorleaf, for instance, to do project management, or like I said, with our vendors, right? So I manage, when we have partners helping us out, for instance, and even when the customer does, they sometimes will just say, hey, you know what, she's doing it, she can have it, and that, in certain instances, is a blessing, because then you don't have too many people and too many fingers in the pie. So it can go both ways. It's great when you have a great project manager from the customer. And it's really good when they say, you know what, we're letting you run with the ball and you have our full cooperation.
Yeah. And I think you need that single point of contact that's going to take that responsibility. They might not be a project manager, but they have to be a pretty high-level stakeholder that can drive up escalations through their company so that they bring the right resources in, because we can't do that.
Right. That's the thing we need, right? So if there's not going to be a PM on the other side, we need somebody who can escalate, who can get resources, who can act as a proxy inside their organization and work with us. But to your point, that communication is still critical, regardless of how much of an active role they're playing.
Exactly. And I think what drives a lot of it, too, is the size of the project. Right now I'm managing a pretty large project where I have 4 PMs on our side, 3 PMs on the other side, the customer, and that could grow as much as up to 8 PMs working this. But it's going to be where we're putting in software at 25 locations. So a lot of it is the size of the project that's really going to drive your need for, how many project managers do you need? Do you need a program manager to manage the project managers?
You brought up the word, Jeff. I was going to stop you. I was going to be like, so is this getting into program management? We talk about something of that scale?
Yes.
Well, wait. So my question here is that sounds like a whole big, long discussion. And I know we're towards the end of this particular podcast. So maybe that's a subject we could table and invite you guys back. That would be a lot of fun. But when you're talking about resources and communication and all of what I'm curious about, and Jonathan and I have touched on this in a couple different, actually more than a couple different, it seems to keep coming up, podcasts, is the actual people side of managing a services project. So much of what we do is technology driven, and yet so much of that can fall flat if you're not managing the people side of things. People are way messier than technology.
Oh yeah, put me on the technology side. It's much more consistent.
Right.
The relationships are really, really important. So go ahead.
And I
Jen,
guess
I'm sorry.
no. I was going to ask, but basically, what are the most important parts of managing the people side of a services project? Is it collaboration? Is it the alignment we've talked about?
There's a couple things. Certainly, when you do your project kickoff, pre-COVID, we used to do a lot of the larger project kickoffs in person. And that was really nice because you could, foster that relationship. And that's something that, we do mainly remotely at this point. But if you get the opportunity to be able to get in an actual room with people, that's a great way to build those relationships. But from the project kickoff, I always try to be on camera, put a face with a name. But just having weekly meetings and having that communication is really, really important. Even if you're only talking and say, hey, we don't really have anything to show you this week. This is what we're working on. Do you guys have any questions, concerns? Did you have anything that maybe you noodled on and now you say, hey, wait a second, make sure you do this. And it keeps people engaged in the project, right? So that's part of the people, keeping everyone engaged throughout the project. But making those relationships along the way is really critical. And also know your resources, know their strengths, right? know when you need maybe to add a little more assistance and when you need to step back, So knowing your resources is also, I think, really important when you're talking about the people factor.
Yeah, I totally agree with Melissa. And I believe that that's what makes a real successful project is those relationships.
Yeah, I like the point that you made, Melissa, about engagement, right? Developing the relationships is important, right? So I don't want to take anything away from that point. But I've been on some of your projects and I've seen what you're talking about, and I agree it's been very effective, is just keeping the cadence. Oh, we don't have anything to talk about this week. We could cancel the meeting, everybody could get the time back. Or we could spend 5 or 10 minutes just connecting, right? And
Yes.
it keeps the people connected. And maybe something comes up that wouldn't have come up if you canceled the meeting, right? So I get what you're saying there, and I think that is important. And it's to your other point, it's like reading the room. It's reading the people, knowing your resources, knowing the team. Hey, this is a group of people. Yeah, it's a collection of tasks, and it's a schedule, and it's a budget, and it's scope, but it's also a team of people who have to work well together to get to that goal. Knowing that and understanding it is maybe, I don't know, is it fair to say it's sort of the softer side of PMing, but you need to pay attention to it?
Yeah, totally agree.
I mean, it's the same as managing people in anything, I would imagine, right? Whereas to your point, you need to know their strengths and weaknesses, but also the deeper relationship that you can build, the more you understand them, what drives them, and what keeps them engaged, what turns them off. And if a biggest part of managing people is, I think, allowing people to be heard and feeling like they've got buy-in to this. And everybody works harder on a project or for a manager if they feel heard and seen and important.
Well, yeah, that team mentality. So, maybe a project manager is leading a meeting, but at the end, thank you to the team, right? Yeah,
Yep.
which is something I think is very important. And I think that, overall, I believe that we as Razorleaf do a good job, making sure that, when we're working with a customer, that we are working as one team, not as a separate team.
Yeah, and I think actually sometimes acting is almost like an interpreter between the technical side as well as the business side, because sometimes you have the business side that isn't as quite as up on the technical, and vice versa. You have technical people that are very technical but don't really have the knowledge or insight to the business. You have to be that interpreter.
And it's an important role, right? I was going to share a story of where I've seen things fall apart. Back to the points that, Melissa, you were making about how you need to bring the people together and focus on the relationships. I have seen a customer who had a project manager who was very technical and actually came from the technical side, was not very good at the people side of things. And everything was very precise in terms of schedule, in terms of budget, all those things. But it was like missing the forest for the trees because we weren't getting where we needed to go. People weren't working together. They weren't communicating, even though everything had precision to it. And it's like, is that really successful though?
Right. I think it's a mix. You have to have knowledge of both sides to be strong.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be cognizant of it. This is my job on this. I'm the project manager here, and I need to.
Are
make
you
sure
saying I'm over budget? Maybe over talking budget?
I know, not maybe, or getting close. We're just checking in and saying, okay, we're getting close on time. So if in summary, it sounds like a project manager is very much more, to your point, Melissa, very much more than just a scheduler, right? So as the title suggests, you manage the project from inception to completion. You are, and Jeff, you just mentioned this, basically the liaison between the technical team, our technical team, and the customer, but also I thought was an interesting point between technical and business, probably on both sides, both client side and our side.
Mm-hmm.
So you serve as the primary contact to make sure all the cogs are running smoothly and nothing is being forgotten. You're basically the glue that keeps things together. It doesn't sound like a very glamorous job, but extremely critical one. And getting back to where I started with home remodeling and construction, you wouldn't consider building a home without project manager to manage all the subcontractors and all the tasks, et cetera. So why would you not apply the same rules to your business projects? Anybody have anything else you want to add to the summary? Did I hit it pretty square, or?
I think you hit the high points.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a good high level, talk on project management.
All right.
Hit a lot of key points.
Yeah, totally agree.
I would like to thank my co-host, Jonathan Scott, as well as both of our guests, Melissa and Jeff. And I think it was a great discussion. We barely scratched the surface. We identified a couple areas we want to keep talking about. Program management versus project management. How did things scale? Do you always need a project manager depending on scale? I couldn't believe the example Jeff gave where we've got like 8 PMs. That sounds insane, but okay. So you have to have a program manager for the PMs. And how that all relates to project size, et cetera. So we'd like to have you guys back for a second podcast. And, to our listeners, if there's something we didn't cover here that you have questions about, or you want to suggest that we cover it more deeply in the next one, or just a different topic you'd like to hear about, please reach out to us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. We'd like it to be a conversation. It's a whole lot more interesting if you're a part of the conversation. And until next time, stay sharp, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If you have any questions about project management, we'd love to have that conversation. Just leave us a comment on our post or send us an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. If you like this podcast, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform or on our YouTube channel. Until next time, stay sharp.